In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a single drop of arsenic turned afternoon tea into a deadly ritual, claiming the life of the vicar's wife without a whisper of suspicion. Welcome to Miss Marple's Teacup murders, where secrets brew stronger more than Earl Grey. Grab a cup of tea, settle into your favourite chair and let the suspense unfold. If you're hooked on the mystery, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The inviting aroma of deception, nestled in the rolling green hills of the English countryside, the village of St. Mary Mead hums with the gentle rhythm of a simpler life. Birds chirp in the hedgerows, the church bells chime softly on the hour, and the scent of freshly cut grass mingles with the promise of afternoon tea. But beneath this idyllic surface, dark currents swirl, waiting for the right moment to surface. At the heart of it all sits Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster whose unassuming demeanour hides a mind sharper than a tailor's needle. From her cosy cottage garden, she knits a woolen scarf, her eyes flitting across the village green like a hawk masquerading as a sparrow. She knows every soul in St. Mary Mead, their habits, their secrets, and the quiet grudges they carry like hidden thorns. Today, her keen instincts are tingling, stirred by a small but peculiar event, a handwritten invitation, delivered by the postman, to an afternoon tea at the vicarage. The invitation, penned in an overly florid script, comes from Mrs. Eleanor Price, the vicar's wife, a woman known for her impeccable manners and rigid devotion to propriety. The tea is to be a small affair, a gathering of the village's most notable residents, and Miss Marple's inclusion feels both expected and oddly deliberate. The handwriting, with its extravagant loops, seems too eager, too insistent, as if Mrs. Price is hiding nervousness behind her ink. Miss Marple tucks the note into her pocket, her curiosity piqued. She adjusts her hat, grabs her walking stick, and sets off for the vicarage, her mind already sifting through the possibilities. Tea parties in St. Mary Mead are rarely just about tea. The vicarage, a charming stone house draped in ivy, buzzes with the warmth of a well-kept home as Miss Marple arrives. The air is thick with the aroma of freshly baked scones, clotted cream, and steaming Darjeeling tea, poured from a silver teapot that gleams in the afternoon light. Mrs. Price greets her guests with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she arranges the delicate porcelain cups. The guest list is a curious mix. Colonel Bantry, a retired military man with a booming voice and a penchant for war stories, dominates the conversation. His young wife, Dolly Bantry, fidgets with her pearl necklace, her eyes darting nervously. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, puffs thoughtfully on his pipe, his brow furrowed. And then there's Mr. Reginald Blackwood, a newcomer from London, a suave businessman with a polished smile and a past as murky as the Thames on a foggy night. As the group settles around the lace-covered table, the conversation begins innocently. Enough. Mrs. Price steers the talk toward the upcoming village fete, her voice bright but brittle, like thin glass. The Colonel grumbles about the lack of discipline in modern youth. Dolly giggles at nothing in particular, and Dr. Haydock shares a dry anecdote about a patient's hypochondria. Blackwood, however, remains elusive, deflecting questions about his recent travels with vague references to business in the city. Miss Marple sips her tea, her eyes never still, catching the small details others miss. The way Dolly's gaze lingers on Mrs. Price with a flash of resentment, the Colonel's uneasy grip on his saucer, and Blackwood's habit of glancing at the door as if expecting an interruption. Then, without warning, the room shatters into chaos. Mrs. Price, Mid-sentence about the church flower rota, lets out a choked gasp. Her teacup slips from her hand, crashing onto the hardwood floor in a spray of porcelain and amber liquid. She clutches her throat, her face contorting in agony as foam bubbles at her lips. She collapses, her body crumpling like a marionette, with cut strings. Dr. Haydock leaps to her side, his medical instincts kicking in, but his face soon darkens. "Cyanide," he mutters, his voice grim. "She's gone." The room freezes, the weight of the word poison hanging like a storm cloud, the colonel sputters. Dolly lets out a stifled scream, and Blackwood's face remains unnervingly calm, his eyes narrowing slightly. As the guests reel, Miss Marple's mind is already at work, cataloguing every detail. She notices an extra teacup, on the tray, untouched, its saucer pristine. She spots a faint smudge of lipstick on Mrs. Price's saucer, a shade of coral that doesn't match the pale pink Mrs. Price wore. The police arrive shortly after, led by Inspector Slack, a man whose bluster far outweighs his deductive skills. He barks orders, cordons off the room, and begins questioning the guests, but his approach is as subtle as a sledgehammer. Miss Marple, however, remains in the background, her knitting needles clicking softly as she listens, observes, and pieces together the puzzle. Who had the opportunity to slip poison into the tea? Was it a crime of passion, revenge, or something colder, more calculated? The vicarage, once a haven of warmth, now feels like a stage where every guest plays a role. Miss Marple recalls a fleeting moment before the tragedy. Mrs. Price hesitating as she poured the tea, her eyes flicking toward Blackwood. Was it fear? Suspicion? And why had Dolly Bantry's hand trembled when she reached for the sugar bowl? The colonel's bluster, too, seemed forced, as if masking unease. As Inspector Slack fumbles through his initial inquiries, Miss Marple knows this is no isolated act. The extra teacup, the mismatched lipstick, the nervous glances, they're threads in a tapestry of deceit, one she's determined to unravel. This first teacup murder is only the beginning, a single note in a symphony of secrets that will soon engulf St. Mary Mead. As the police cart away Mrs. Price's body and the guests disperse, whispering accusations, Miss Marple returns to her cottage, her mind buzzing. The village may seem sleepy, but its heart beats with hidden motives, and she's just started to feel its pulse. Stay tuned for Chapter 2, where alibis begin to crack and the past creeps into the present like an uninvited guest. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Vicarage. The sun dips low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths as the village grapples with the shock of Mrs. Eleanor Price's death. The vicarage, now sealed with police tape, stands, silent, its once welcoming windows dark. Miss Jane Marple sits by her fireplace, her knitting needles paused as her mind sifts through the chaos of the afternoon. The village buzzes with gossip, whispers of poison, betrayal, and hidden grudges. But Miss Marple knows better than to be swayed by idle chatter. She's focused on the threads left dangling, the extra teacup, the coral lipstick smudge, and the fleeting glances that betrayed more than words. Today, she decides, is a day for visiting, for stirring the pot gently to see what rises to the surface. Her first stop is the Bantry residence, a grand manor at the edge of the village. Its rose gardens immaculate, but its atmosphere tense. Colonel Bantry greets her at the door, his moustache bristling as he ushers her into the drawing room. His usual bluster is subdued, replaced by a nervous energy that makes his hands fidget with a cigar he doesn't light. Dolly Bantry, perched on a velvet settee, looks pale, her eyes red-rimmed as if she's been crying. Miss Marple declines a cup of tea, prudent given the circumstances, and steers the conversation toward the vicarage gathering. She mentions the fete, hoping to loosen their tongues, but the colonel grows curt, muttering about bad business and poor taste to dwell on it. Dolly, however, lets slip a curious detail. Mrs. Price had been unusually quiet in the days leading up to the tea, avoiding her usual rounds at the church. Miss Marple notes Dolly's bitten nails and the way she avoids her husband's gaze. Next, Miss Marple visits Dr. Haydock at his modest surgery, a stone's throw from the village square. The doctor, still shaken, is sterilizing his instruments. His movements methodical but distracted. He confirms the poison was cyanide, likely administered in the tea, but admits he didn't see who poured the cups. Miss Marple probes gently, asking about Mrs. Price's health. Dr. Haydock hesitates, then reveals she'd visited him a week ago, complaining of sleeplessness and vague fears of being watched. He'd prescribed a mild sedative, but now wonders if he missed a deeper distress. As Miss Marple leaves, she notices a photograph on his desk. A younger Haydock with a woman resembling Mrs. Price, both smiling at a long-ago village fair. A coincidence or something more? Her final visit takes her to the Red Lion Inn, where Mr. Reginald Blackwood has taken a room. The inn's taproom is lively with locals, but Blackwood sits alone in a corner, nursing a whiskey. His polished charm is intact as he greets Miss Marple, but his eyes are wary, like those of a man expecting trouble. She engages him in small talk, mentioning London's hustle and bustle, but he deflects, claiming he's in St. Mary Mead for a quiet retreat. Miss Marple presses, asking if he knew Mrs. Price before the tea. His smile tightens, and he admits to a passing acquaintance. She'd written to him about a charitable venture, but never elaborated. As Miss Marple bids him good evening, she spots a crumpled letter in the ashtray by his table, the handwriting eerily similar to the invitation she received. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple pieces together her findings. The Bantry's unease suggests a personal stake, perhaps a grudge against Mrs. Price or fear of exposure. Dr. Haydock's revelation about her anxiety hints at a threat she sensed but couldn't name, and Blackwood's evasiveness, coupled with that discarded letter, points to a connection he's reluctant to admit. Miss Marple recalls the vicarage scene. The tray of teacups had been prepared in the kitchen, out of sight, before Mrs. Price brought it to the table. Could someone have tampered with it there? And what of the extra teacup, meant for another guest, or a deliberate misdirection? As night falls, the village seems to hold its breath. Miss Marple lights a candle, her thoughts circling the coral lipstick smudge. It wasn't Mrs. Price's shade, nor Dolly's, whose lips were unpainted that day. The clue feels tantalizingly close, yet elusive, like a name on the tip of her tongue. She resolves to attend the church service tomorrow, where the village will gather to mourn, and perhaps to reveal more than they intend. The web of deceit is tightening, and Miss Marple is determined to find its centre. The trail of poison leads deeper into St. Mary Mead's secrets, where every smile hides a motive. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, where a forgotten diary surfaces and whispers from the past grow louder. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Past. The morning mist clings to St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a soft grey veil as church bells toll mournfully for Mrs. Eleanor Price. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her Sunday best, joins the sombre procession to the stone chapel, her eyes scanning the congregation. The pews are packed with villagers, their faces a mix of grief and unease, as if the shadow of poison lingers in the air. Reverend Thomas Price, pale and hollow-eyed, delivers a halting eulogy, his voice breaking as he speaks of his wife's devotion to the community. Miss Marple, seated near the back, notices the small glances exchanged among the mourners, some curious, others guarded. The church, a place of solace, feels like a stage where secrets are barely concealed. After the service, Miss Marple lingers in the vestry, offering condolences to the Reverend. His hands tremble as he clutches a prayer book, and she gently asks about Eleanor's final days. He hesitates, then admits she'd been preoccupied, often locking herself in her study to write letters or sort through old papers. He mentions a diary she kept, one he hasn't had the heart to open since her death. Intrigued, Miss Marple suggests it might hold memories worth preserving and offers to help organise Eleanor's belongings. The Reverend, distracted by grief, agrees, inviting her to the vicarage later that day. At the vicarage, now eerily quiet without Eleanor's bustling presence, Miss Marple is led to a small study cluttered with books and sewing baskets. On the desk lies the diary, a slim leather volume with a faded ribbon marker. As the Reverend steps out to speak with a parishioner, Miss Marple opens it, her fingers careful but deliberate. The entries are brief, filled with notes about church duties and village events, but the final pages shift in tone. Eleanor wrote of sleepless nights, a sense of unease, and cryptic mentions of an old debt and someone who knows too much. One entry, dated 3 days before the tea, reads, "He came to the village. I thought the past was buried, but it's not. Must confront him." Miss Marple's pulse quickens. Could he be Reginald Blackwood, the mysterious newcomer? Her thoughts are interrupted by a soft creak from the hallway. She slips the diary into her bag just as Dolly Bantry appears, claiming she came to drop off a condolence card. Her eyes dart to the desk, and Miss Marple senses she's looking for something specific. Dolly's chatter is nervous, filled with forced sympathy, and she leaves quickly when pressed about her friendship with Eleanor. Miss Marple makes a mental note. Dolly's presence here feels less like kindness and more like reconnaissance. Later, at the village post office, Miss Marple chats with Mrs. Muggins, the postmistress, whose knack for remembering every letter rivals Miss Marple's own observations. Mrs. Muggins recalls Eleanor mailing several letters to London in the weeks before her death, one addressed to a Mr. R.B. at a city hotel. The initials align with Blackwood, and Miss Marple wonders if Eleanor's old debt connects to his sudden arrival in St. Mary Mead. She also learns that Dolly Bantry had been seen lingering near the vicarage mailbox days before the tea, though she claimed to be just passing by. As evening settles, Miss Marple returns to her cottage, the diary's words echoing in her mind. Eleanor's fear of an unburied past suggests a history that someone, perhaps her killer, wanted silenced. The coral lipstick smudge, still a puzzle, gnaws at her. She recalls the women at the tea. Dolly wore none, and Eleanor's shade was pink. Could another woman have been involved, someone unseen? The extra teacup looms large in her thoughts, a clue that feels like a missing piece of the jigsaw. The church service and the diary have stirred the waters, revealing ripples of a deeper truth. Miss Marple knows the village's calm is a facade, hiding motives that twist like vines. As she sips her evening tea, she resolves to dig deeper into Blackwood's past and Dolly's odd behavior. The answers lie in the shadows of memory, waiting to be uncovered. Stay tuned for Chapter 4, where a hidden letter sparks a dangerous revelation. Chapter 4. A Letter from the Grave. The morning sun filters through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on her parlour floor. She sits with a cup of tea, the stolen diary resting on her lap, its cryptic entries fueling her determination. The village of St. Mary Mead hums with its usual rhythm, milk bottles clinking, the baker's van rumbling past. But Miss Marple's mind is far from the mundane. Eleanor Price's words about an old debt and a mysterious he point to a past that refuses to stay buried. Today, she decides, is the day to chase the trail left by that letter Mrs. Muggins mentioned, the one sent to Mr. R.B. in London. Miss Marple begins at the village hall, where the Women's Institute is preparing for the upcoming fete. The hall is a flurry of activity, bunting being strung, jam jars labelled, but she seeks out Mrs. Clement, the vicar's housekeeper, who often helped Eleanor with correspondence. Mrs. Clement, a wiry woman with a no-nonsense air, is sorting tablecloths but pauses to chat. When Miss Marple casually mentions Eleanor's recent letters, Mrs. Clement frowns, recalling a heated moment she overheard a month ago. Eleanor was on the telephone, her voice low but urgent, saying, "You can't come here, not after all these years." Mrs. Clement didn't catch the caller's identity, but she saw Eleanor burn a letter afterward, its edges curling in the vicarage fireplace. Miss Marple's eyes narrow. A burned letter suggests secrets worth destroying. Her next stop is the Red Lion Inn, where Reginald Blackwood still lodges. She finds him in the lounge, reading a newspaper, his polished shoes gleaming under the table. She engages him with her usual disarming charm, mentioning the fate's need for sponsors. Blackwood is cordial but guarded, his smile a touch too practiced. When she subtly probes about his ties to Eleanor, he claims they met only once, years ago, through a mutual acquaintance in London. But his fingers tighten on the newspaper, and Miss Marple spots a monogrammed cufflink, R.B., glinting on his sleeve. As she leaves, she notices the innkeeper sorting mail and glimpses an envelope addressed to Blackwood, postmarked from London, its return address smudged, but bearing a familiar looping script. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple decides to take a risk. She telephones a friend in London, Miss Hartnell, a retired governess with a knack for navigating city records. She asks Miss Hartnell to check hotel registries for a Reginald Blackwood, hoping to trace his movements before arriving in St. Mary Mead. While awaiting a response, she revisits the vicarage, this time with permission to sort through Eleanor's desk for fate donations. Alone in the study, she finds a locked drawer, its key hidden in a hymn book. Inside is a single letter, unburned, addressed to Eleanor from a London solicitor. It references a legal dispute from 15 years ago, involving a significant sum and a man named Robert Blake. The name is close enough to Blackwood to raise Miss Marple's suspicions. The letter warns Eleanor to settle the matter privately or face exposure. As she pockets the letter, footsteps echo outside the study. It's Colonel Bantry, claiming he's there to discuss the church roof fund with the Reverend. His presence feels out of place, and his eyes linger on the desk, much like Dolly's had. Miss Marple deflects with small talk, but his abrupt departure leaves her uneasy. Later, Miss Hartnell calls back, confirming that a Reginald Blackwood checked into a London hotel a month ago, the same week Eleanor sent her letter to Mr. R.B. More intriguingly, The hotel's guest log lists a woman, a Miss Clara Vane, who stayed in the adjacent room and matches the description of someone seen with Blackwood at a London cafe. The pieces are falling into place, but the puzzle is far from complete. The letter from the solicitor hints at a financial motive, possibly tied to Blackwood, or is it Blake? The mysterious Clara Vane introduces a new player, perhaps the owner of the coral lipstick. Miss Marple senses the net closing, but the danger is growing too. As she watches the village from her window, the quiet streets seem to pulse with hidden intent, each passerby a potential suspect. The past is speaking louder now, its voice carried in letters and whispers. Miss Marple knows the truth is close, but it's a truth someone is desperate to keep buried. Stay tuned for Chapter 5, where a late-night visitor brings danger to her doorstep. Chapter 5. A Knock in the Night. The moon hangs low over St. Mary Mead, bathing the village in a silvery glow that makes even the familiar seem strange. Miss Jane Marple sits by her parlour window, the solicitor's letter tucked safely in her knitting basket. The name Robert Blake and the mention of Clara Vane swirl in her thoughts, like leaves caught in a restless wind. The village sleeps, but Miss Marple is wide awake, her instincts humming with the sense that danger is drawing near. The clock ticks past midnight when a soft knock at her cottage door startles her. It's not the polite rap of a neighbour, but a cautious, almost secretive sound. She adjusts her shawl, lights a second candle, and approaches the door, her heart steady but alert. Peering through the curtain, she sees a figure in a dark coat, face half hidden by a scarf. It's Dolly Bantry, her usual poise replaced by a nervous twitch. Miss Marple opens the door, inviting her in with a calm that masks her curiosity. Dolly's hands tremble as she removes her scarf, revealing eyes wide with fear. She claims she couldn't sleep, haunted by Eleanor's death, but her words stumble as if rehearsed. Over a pot of chamomile tea, Dolly confesses she overheard Eleanor arguing with someone in the vicarage garden days before the tea, a man's voice she didn't recognize. She swears she meant to tell the police but feared being misunderstood. Miss Marple notes the way Dolly's gaze flicks to the knitting basket, as if she knows something is hidden there. After Dolly leaves, Miss Marple ponders her late-night visit. Was it a genuine plea for help, or a ploy to gauge what Miss Marple knows? The mention of a man's voice in the garden adds a new layer to the mystery, possibly tying to Blackwood or the elusive Robert Blake. She decides to revisit the vicarage garden at dawn, hoping to find traces of that clandestine meeting. Under the faint light of early morning, she examines the flower beds near the vicarage's back gate. There, half buried in the soil, she finds a cigarette stub, its brand foreign to St. Mary Mead, something expensive, likely from London. Nearby, a torn scrap of fabric, fine silk in a deep blue, catches on a rose thorn. It's not Eleanor's style, nor Dolly's, but it sparks a memory of Clara Vane, the woman linked to Blackwood in London. Later that day, Miss Marple visits the village library, a quiet nook run by Miss Weatherby, a spinster with an encyclopedic memory for gossip. Over a cup of weak tea, Miss Marple inquires about any strangers seen in the village before Eleanor's death. Miss Weatherby recalls a woman in a stylish blue coat spotted near the vicarage a week ago, asking directions to the train station. She'd seemed flustered, her accent faintly urban, and carried a small valise. Miss Marple's mind races. Could this be Clara Vane, perhaps meeting Eleanor or Blackwood in secret? The silk scrap and cigarette stub suggest a rendezvous, one that may have sealed Eleanor's fate. As evening falls, Miss Marple receives a call from Inspector Slack, who's been chasing dead ends. He mentions a new lead. A chemist in a nearby town sold cyanide to an unknown buyer days before the murder, described only as well-dressed, possibly from out of town. The description could fit Blackwood, or even the mysterious woman in blue. Miss Marple shares nothing of her findings, knowing Slack's heavy-handed methods would scatter the delicate clues she's gathered. Instead, she resolves to confront Blackwood directly, but carefully, at the fete tomorrow, where the villagers' eyes will offer some protection. The night grows still, but Miss Marple feels the weight of unseen eyes watching her cottage. The knock from Dolly, the garden's secrets, and the spectre of Clara Vane weave a tighter net around the truth. Someone in St. Mary Mead is desperate to keep the past buried, and Miss Marple is getting too close for their comfort. Stay tuned for Chapter 6, where the village fete becomes a stage for dangerous revelations. Chapter 6. The fate of fates, the village green of St. Mary Mead buzzes with life as the annual fete transforms the sleepy hamlet into a kaleidoscope of colour and sound. Stalls brim with homemade jams, knitted scarves, and prize marrows, while children dart through the crowd, clutching sticky toffee apples. Miss Jane Marple navigates the throng, her straw hat shielding her from the midday sun, but her eyes are sharp, scanning for the faces that hold the key to Eleanor Price's murder. The cigarette stub, the silk scrap, and Dolly Bantry's midnight confession weigh on her mind, pointing to a web of connections that the festive chaos might just unravel. Today, she plans to observe Reginald Blackwood closely, hoping the fate's loose tongues and crowded bustle will coax hidden truths into the open. At the tea tent, Miss Marple spots Blackwood near a table laden with scones, charming a group of elderly ladies with his easy smile. She approaches, offering a plate of shortbread as a pretext to join the conversation. His demeanour is polished, but she notices his quick glance toward the vicarage, now visible across the green. She mentions the tragic tea party, watching his reaction. His smile falters briefly, and he mutters something about such a dreadful loss, before excusing himself to inspect a raffle stall. Miss Marple follows at a distance, noting how he lingers near the edge of the crowd, exchanging a few hushed words with a woman in a blue scarf. The woman's face is obscured, but her posture, tense, hurried, matches Miss Weatherby's description of the stranger seen near the vicarage. Meanwhile, the Colonel and Dolly Bantry man a bric-a-brac stall, their forced cheer barely masking tension. Miss Marple pauses to browse, picking up a chipped teacup that reminds her of the vicarage's fateful set. She asks Dolly about Eleanor's charity work, probing for any hint of the old debt from the diary. Dolly's response is curt, her hands fumbling with a stack of doilies as she claims Eleanor was always meddling in others' affairs. The Colonel interrupts, steering the talk to safer topics, but Miss Marple catches a look between them, fearful, almost conspiratorial. As she moves on, she spots Dr. Haydock at the first aid tent, his face drawn as he bandages a child's scraped knee. She asks about his old photograph with Eleanor, and he admits they were childhood friends, but his tone grows clipped when she mentions the cyanide purchase. The fete takes a dramatic turn when a commotion erupts near the cake stall. A young boy, rummaging through a pile of donated books, pulls out a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages fluttering to the ground. Miss Marple hurries over, her heart racing as she recognizes Eleanor's handwriting. The notebook, overlooked, in the vicarage's clutter, contains a list of names and sums, some crossed out, with RB, circled beside a figure of $500. A final note reads, "Must tell T before it's too late." The crowd's attention shifts to a tug-of-war game, giving Miss Marple a moment to slip the notebook into her bag. The initials RB and the some suggest a financial tangle, possibly linked to Blackwood or the solicitor's letter. As the fate winds down, Miss Marple notices the woman in the blue scarf slipping away toward the churchyard. She follows, keeping to the shadows of the yew trees, and overhears a heated exchange. The woman's voice, sharp and urban, accuses someone, Blackwood she assumes, of breaking the deal. The man's reply is too low to catch, but the some rustle of paper suggests an exchange. Before Miss Marple can get closer, the pair vanishes into the dusk, leaving her with more questions than answers. The notebook, the overheard argument, and the blue scarf tie the mystery tighter, but the danger feels closer than ever. The fate's laughter fades, but its revelations linger, each clue a step toward the truth. Miss Marple knows the killer is watching, waiting for her to falter. Stay tuned for Chapter 7, where a midnight discovery threatens to unravel everything. Chapter 7. Shadows on the Wall. The stars glitter coldly above St. Mary Mead as Miss Jane Marple sits by her parlour fire, the glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. The notebook from the fate, now hidden in a locked drawer, burns in her, mind with its cryptic list of names and sums, RB circled like a warning. The overheard argument in the churchyard, the woman in the blue scarf, and the financial tangle tied to Reginald Blackwood, or perhaps Robert Blake, point to a motive rooted in greed or betrayal. Tonight, the village feels restless, as if the secrets buried in its quiet lanes are clawing their way to the surface. Miss Marple senses she's closing in on the truth, but with it comes a creeping unease. She's being watched. Her thoughts are interrupted by a faint rustle outside her cottage, like footsteps on the gravel path. She dims the lamp and peers through the lace curtains, catching a glimpse of a figure retreating into the darkness. The shape is indistinct, but the glint of a cigarette tip matches the expensive brand she found in the vicarage garden. Heart steady, she resolves to act quickly, knowing the killer may be growing desperate. She decides to revisit the vicarage at midnight, when the village sleeps, to search for any overlooked clues in Eleanor's study. Slipping on her darkest shawl and carrying a small torch, she moves silently through the lanes, the notebook tucked safely in her pocket. The vicarage looms silent, its windows black under the moonlight. Miss Marple uses a spare key from the Reverend, left for fate organisers, to let herself in. The study feels colder now, its air heavy with absence. She searches, the desk again, this time finding a hidden compartment behind a false panel. Inside is a single photograph, yellowed with age, showing a younger Eleanor with a man who resembles Blackwood, both standing outside a London theatre. On the back, in Eleanor's hand, is written, Robert, 1910, never again. The date places, the connection 15 years ago, aligning with the solicitor's letter about a legal dispute. Miss Marple's pulse quickens. Could this be the old debt Eleanor feared? As she pockets the photograph, a floorboard creaks in the hallway. She switches off her torch and slips behind a curtain, her breath shallow. A figure enters, moving, with purpose toward the desk. The moonlight reveals Colonel Bantry, his face taut with anxiety. He rummages through the drawers, muttering about that cursed letter. Finding nothing, he curses softly and leaves, unaware of Miss Marple's presence. Her mind races. Why is the Colonel searching Eleanor's study in secret? His nervous demeanour at the fete and Dolly's odd behaviour suggest the Bantrys are entangled in more than village gossip. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple pieces together the night's findings. The photograph ties Eleanor to Blackwood, or Robert Blake, in a way that suggests a personal, perhaps painful history. The Colonel's midnight search hints at a secret he's desperate to protect, possibly linked to the notebook's sums. She recalls the woman in the blue scarf, whose urban accent and hurried exchange with Blackwood at the fate point to Clara Vane, the mysterious figure from London. Could Clara be the key to the coral lipstick smudge, a woman who slipped into the vicarage unnoticed? The extra teacup, untouched, nags at her. Perhaps it was meant for Clara, who never arrived. As dawn nears, Miss Marple lights a candle and jots down her thoughts. The killer's motive is taking shape, a blend of old grudges and hidden wealth, but the how and why remain elusive. She knows her nocturnal adventure has stirred the hornet's nest, and the figure outside her cottage was no coincidence. The village's calm is a thin veneer, cracking under the weight of its secrets. Stay tuned for Chapter 8, where a confrontation at the Red Lion Inn unveils a shocking truth. Chapter 8. Truths over whiskey. The afternoon sun casts a golden haze over St. Mary Mead, but the warmth does little to ease the chill in Miss Jane Marple's bones. The photograph of Eleanor and a younger Blackwood, the Colonel's secretive search, and the shadow outside her cottage have tightened the knot of suspicion in her mind. The village's facade of tranquility is crumbling, and Miss Marple knows the time for subtlety is nearing its end. She decides to confront Reginald Blackwood at the Red Lion Inn, where the public setting might loosen his guard. Armed with the photograph and notebook, she treads carefully, aware that each step brings her closer to a killer who's watching her every move. The inn's taproom is lively with the clink of glasses and the hum of local chatter, but Blackwood sits alone at a corner table, a half-empty whiskey glass before him. His polished charm is fraying, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. Miss Marple approaches with her usual air of harmless curiosity, mentioning the fate's success to break the ice. She then slides the photograph across the table, her voice soft but firm, asking if he recalls the moment with Eleanor outside the London theatre. Blackwood's hand freezes mid-sip, his jaw tightening. He claims it was a chance meeting, a fleeting acquaintance from a charity event, but his voice lacks conviction. When she mentions the notebook's entry with RB and $500, his composure cracks, and he admits to a business deal gone sour with Eleanor years ago, one he'd hoped was forgotten. Pressing further, Miss Marple asks about Clara Vane, the woman linked to him in London and possibly the blue-scarfed figure at the fete. Blackwood's eyes dart to the door, and he insists Clara is merely a former associate, unconnected to Eleanor's death. But his fingers betray him, crumpling a napkin as he speaks. Miss Marple notices a faint stain on his cuff, coral lipstick, identical to the smudge on Eleanor's saucer. She keeps this observation to herself, thanking him for his time and leaving before his unease turns to suspicion. Outside, she spots Inspector Slack lingering near the inn, his presence a reminder that the police are circling, but without her clarity. Her next move takes her to the vicarage, where Reverend Price is sorting through condolence cards. She gently probes about Eleanor's past in London, mentioning the photograph. The Reverend, weary with grief, recalls Eleanor's time as a governess in the city, where she mingled with wealthy families, including one with a son named Robert. He dismisses it as youthful folly, but his hands shake as he speaks of her sudden decision to leave London for St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple wonders if that folly involved Blackwood and the mysterious debt. As evening falls, she visits Mrs. Muggins at the post office, hoping to trace more of Eleanor's correspondence. Mrs. Muggins, ever eager to share, reveals a package sent to Eleanor just days before her death from a London address linked to a law firm. The package was small, possibly documents, and Eleanor seemed agitated when collecting it. Miss Marple connects this to the solicitor's letter about a legal dispute, suspecting it held proof of Blackwood's or Robert Blake's past misdeeds. Could Clara Vane have been a courier or something more? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lays out her clues. The photograph tying Eleanor to Blackwood, the coral lipstick on his cuff, the notebook's financial hint, and the package from London. The pieces suggest a motive rooted in a long-ago betrayal, but the killer's identity remains just out of reach. The Colonel's nocturnal search and Dolly's nervous visits linger in her thoughts, as does Clara Vane's elusive presence. The confrontation has rattled Blackwood, and Miss Marple knows the killer will act soon to protect their secret. The village's quiet nights are numbered, and danger is closing in. Stay tuned for Chapter 9, where a hidden room reveals a deadly secret. Chapter 9. The Hidden Room. The dawn breaks over St. Mary Mead with a soft pink glow, but the village's charm feels brittle to Miss Jane Marple as she sips her morning tea. The coral lipstick on Blackwood's cuff, the solicitor's package, and the photograph of Eleanor in her youth have woven a tighter web around the murder, yet the killer's face remains in shadow. Her confrontation with Blackwood at the Red Lion has stirred the waters, and she senses the ripples are drawing danger closer. Today, she resolves to explore the vicarage one last time, driven by a hunch that Eleanor's secrets are hidden not just in papers, but in the very walls of her home. Miss Marple arrives at the vicarage under the guise of helping with fate accounts, finding Reverend Price distracted and weary. She asks to revisit Eleanor's study, citing a need to cross-check donation records. Alone in the room, she examines the bookcase, its shelves heavy with hymnals and sewing manuals. Her fingers trace the edges, seeking anything out of place, and she notices a faint draft from behind a panel of wood. Pressing gently, she hears a click, and the panel swings open to reveal a narrow door, barely noticeable in the dim light. Heart quickening, she steps into a small, hidden room, its air musty with disuse. Inside, she finds a locked chest, a dusty mirror, and a single chair facing a wall of faded photographs. The chest yields to a hairpin, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. They're addressed to Eleanor from Robert Blake, dated 15 years ago, filled with passionate promises and mentions of a shared venture that ended in betrayal. One letter references a sum of money, 500, the same amount in the notebook, stolen from a joint account. The tone shifts in later letters, growing bitter, with Robert accusing Eleanor of exposing him to ruin. Miss Marple's mind races. Blackwood, or Blake, had a motive rooted in this old wound. But was he the poisoner, or is someone else pulling the strings? As she examines the photographs, one catches her eye, a group shot from a London charity event, showing Eleanor, a younger Blackwood, and a woman with striking features, her lips painted coral. A note on the back identifies her as Clara Vane, friend and confidant. The lipstick links her to the vicarage teacup, suggesting she was there, unseen, on the fatal day. Miss Marple pockets a letter and the photograph, but a sudden noise, a creak from the study, makes her freeze. She slips back through the hidden door, closing it just as Dr. Haydock enters, claiming he's looking for the Reverend. His presence feels too convenient, and his glance toward the bookcase betrays a flicker of unease. Leaving the vicarage, Miss Marple visits the village seamstress, Mrs. Pike, to inquire about the blue silk scrap from the garden. Mrs. Pike recalls making a blue scarf for a woman matching Clara Vane's description, who visited briefly last month and paid in cash. The scarf was a rush order delivered to the Red Lion Inn. The pieces align. Clara, linked to Blackwood and Eleanor, was in St. Mary Mead, possibly plotting with or against them. Miss Marple wonders if Clara slipped the cyanide into the tea, her lipstick leaving the telltale smudge. As night falls, Miss Marple sits by her fire, the letters and photographs spread before her. The hidden room has unveiled a triangle of deceit. Eleanor, Blackwood, and Clara, tied by money and betrayal. Dr. Haydock's unexpected appearance and the Bantry's odd behaviour still nag at her, suggesting others may be entangled. The village's quiet is a lie, masking a killer who knows she's closing in. Stay tuned for Chapter 10, where a final confrontation brews over a deadly cup of tea. If you're enjoying this mystery, please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 10. The Bitter Brew of Truth. The evening mist rolls in from the meadows surrounding St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a veil of quiet anticipation. Miss Jane Marple sits in her cosy parlour, the fire crackling softly as she arranges a small tea service on the low table before her. The hidden room's revelations, the bundle of letters exposing a long-ago betrayal, the photograph linking Eleanor, Blackwood, and Clara Vane in a tangled web of deceit, have crystallized the truth in her mind. The £500 debt was no mere financial squabble. It was the remnant of a fraudulent scheme in London, where Eleanor, young and trusting, had been drawn into Robert Blake's, now Reginald Blackwood's scam involving forged investments. Clara Vane, Blackwood's lover and accomplice, had helped cover it up. But Eleanor, upon discovering their continued crimes, threatened to expose them to the authorities. The solicitor's package contained evidence Eleanor had gathered, and her diary's cryptic notes were pleas for courage to act. Miss Marple knows the killer is Clara Vane, who slipped into the vicarage unseen before the tea party, hiding in the kitchen while Mrs. Price prepared the tray. Clara poisoned Eleanor's cup with cyanide procured from the nearby chemist, using her own teacup as a decoy, hence the extra one on the tray. In her haste, she left a smudge of her signature coral lipstick on the saucer after tasting the brew to ensure it was ready. The blue silk scrap in the garden was from Clara's scarf, torn during a secret meeting with Blackwood to plan the murder. The cigarette stub was Blackwood's, discarded in nervousness. Dolly Bantry's midnight visit and nervous behaviour stemmed from her overhearing the argument in the vicarage garden, mistaking it for an affair and fearing scandal for her own marriage. Colonel Bantry's searches were attempts to retrieve a loan note Eleanor held over him from his gambling debts, unrelated to the murder, but adding to the red herrings. Dr. Haydock's unease came from his unrequited affection for Eleanor in their youth, making him protective of her memory, but innocent of the crime. To bring it all to a head, Miss Marple has sent invitations for a private tea at her cottage, addressed to Blackwood, the Bantrys, Dr. Haydock, and Inspector Slack. She includes a cryptic note. Regarding the teacup that never touched lips, secrets brew stronger than poison. As the guests arrive, the air thickens with tension. Blackwood enters first, his suave facade cracking with a forced smile. The Bantrys follow, Dolly pale and fidgeting, the Colonel blustering about the impropriety of it all. Dr. Haydock arrives next, his pipe unlit, eyes wary. Inspector Slack bustles in last, grumbling about amateur interference. but curious nonetheless. Miss Marple pours the tea with steady hands, her eyes missing nothing, the way Blackwood's gaze darts to the door, Dolly's bitten lips, the Colonel's sweaty brow. She begins innocently, reminiscing about the village fete and Eleanor's dedication to charity. Then she steers the conversation to the past, mentioning London theatres and old acquaintances. Blackwood shifts uncomfortably as she produces the photograph from the hidden room, laying it on the table like a card in a high-stakes game. This was taken in 1910, outside the Lyceum Theatre. Eleanor, you, Mr. Blake, or should I say Blackwood, and Clara Vane. A trio bound by more than friendship, it seems. The room falls silent. Blackwood denies it, but Miss Marple presses on, revealing the letters, passionate at first, then accusatory, detailing how Blackwood and Clara swindled investors, with Eleanor unwittingly involved before she fled to St. Mary Mead in shame. The Colonel interrupts, demanding to know what this has to do with the murder. Miss Marple smiles gently. Everything, Colonel. Eleanor discovered Blackwood and Clara were still at their games. She gathered evidence, the solicitor's package, and planned to expose them. But Clara couldn't allow that. She turns to Blackwood. You arranged for Clara to come to the village, hiding her at the Red Lion. She met Eleanor in the garden, arguing about the past, leaving her blue scarf torn on the roses and your cigarette stub as evidence. Dolly gasps, recognizing the argument she overheard. Miss Marple continues. On the day of the tea, Clara slipped into the vicarage kitchen while Eleanor was distracted. She poisoned the cup meant for Eleanor, using cyanide bought under a disguise. In her rush, she tasted from the saucer, leaving her coral lipstick smudge, and set an extra cup to confuse the scene. Blackwood's face drains of colour, but he scoffs. Preposterous! Where is this Clara? Miss Marple nods to Inspector Slack, who signals 2 constables outside. They escort in a struggling woman, the blue-scarfed figure from the fete, now revealed as Clara Vane, her coral lips pursed in defiance. Arrested this afternoon at the train station attempting to flee, Slack announces gruffly. Clara glares at Blackwood, who crumbles, confessing in a rush. It was her idea. Eleanor was going to ruin us. We only meant to scare her, but Clara, she went too far. Clara snarls, You coward! You supplied the poison. The room erupts as Slack handcuffs them both, the Bantries and Haydock looking on in shock. Miss Marple explains the loose ends. The extra teacup was Clara's own, abandoned in haste. Dolly's visits were out of fear her eavesdropping would implicate her husband, whose gambling debt to Eleanor was minor but embarrassing. The Colonel's searches were for that debt note, which Miss Marple hands to him now, advising discretion. Dr. Haydock's photograph was a memento of innocent affection, nothing more. As the constables lead Blackwood and Clara away, the village exhales, the shadow of murder lifting like the mist at dawn. With the guests departed, Miss Marple sits alone, knitting resumed, her mind at peace. St. Mary Mead will heal, its secrets laid bare, reminding all that even in the gentlest places, human nature brews its own poisons. And so ends our tale of teacup treachery, where a single drop unravelled a lifetime of lies. If you've enjoyed unravelling the mysteries of Miss Marple's teacup murders with us, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories, and comment below with your thoughts on the twist. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for joining the suspense.